Hey, John with John Buys Your House here. And I wanted to talk through a property that we helped a seller with last year in Charlotte in 28273 in the Steele Creek neighborhood. So this was a property on Cardamon Court in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the seller reached out to us because they were having some issues getting their cousin out of the property. They had gone through the eviction process with a local real estate closing attorney. And so much like a heart doctor is going to be different from a brain doctor, is going to be different from a foot doctor, the same thing applies to attorneys. Just because someone is licensed as an attorney does not mean that they're the best attorney to help you with the legal issue at hand. And so this was a law firm that did a lot more real estate closings, and while evictions are real estate related, there's enough of a difference there that this law firm made some mistakes. To compound the issue, the seller had also asked this real estate law firm to handle probate. So unfortunately, this was not only a single inheritance issue, this was actually multiple inheritances. So a few years prior, the seller's grandfather had passed away. The family chose not to do anything with the properties at that time. And then the property was intended to be moved. This property was intended to be moved to the seller's father. Well, unfortunately, the father passed away before they even settled the grandfather's estate. So this same law firm that the seller had asked to evict the seller's cousin, the seller also hired this law firm to do probate. And if you can't tell from my tone and the way that this story is going by now, that law firm messed the probate up as well. So this seller reaches out to us 6 to 8 months into this process of trying to get his cousin out of the property, who was living there under an oral lease, and getting the estates for not only his grandfather, but also his father settled. As you can imagine, this was a really difficult time, from just the logistics of all of the legal processes going on, but the emotions of needing to evict a relative, as well as the death of loved ones. It was really tough for this seller. And so when they reached out to us in May of 2025 and explained everything to us, we could tell, the weight that had been pressing on this particular person. And so after explaining everything, we felt like we had a good idea of how to proceed. I've done many probate closings, have done a handful of evictions, had never done a property that needed an eviction and a probate done at the same time. But our team, and again, we're a big advocate of find the person who does that specific task best. So we have a fantastic probate attorney. We have a fantastic eviction attorney. We make sure that when we are having legal work done, we're working with the best person for that task. So after hearing the seller's story, we felt confident between our probate attorney and our eviction attorney that we could get a resolution. The seller then mentioned that this particular house was also on the city of Charlotte's radar. The grass had not been getting cut. The cousin that was living in the property was leaving junk out front, junk in the side yard. And so the city of Charlotte had started to impose code violations. The letters start innocuously enough. It's usually a, hey, heads up, your grass is too tall. This is the, statute and the city rule or the county rule that you're breaking. Fix the issue. Those letters may come for a few months. Then the city will schedule a hearing. It's typically called the Findings of Fact, or FOF. And from there, they'll make a determination of all the issues and move towards civil penalties is the term. So if the issues remain unresolved long enough, the city will begin to fine you $100 per day for the violation. And while I'm not an advocate for getting your money's worth, it doesn't matter if you got one violation or 100 violations, it's still $100 a day. And so in this case, there were numerous violations, from junk in the yard, overgrown grass, broken windows, issues inside the property with the plumbing, holes in the drywall, junk in the backyard. There were numerous issues. And so now we're looking at probate, eviction, and helping this seller avoid accruing any more $100 per day penalties. So we had our work cut out for us. Again, the good news is these are all things we have plenty of experience with. We've worked with many folks going through probate. We've done quite a few evictions, unfortunately, and the majority of the properties that we buy have some element of disrepair. A lot of times they have code violations, again, just given the amount of repairs needed to the property. So once that we had this conversation, and after we raised the red flag about the attorneys that he had chose to work with, he was completely fine with us taking the lead here. In fact, at this point, he really just didn't want to be involved at all. And so we were able to, again, get our probate attorney engaged, get the eviction attorney on our side engaged. The seller provided all the information we needed to get started on both of those paths. We knew these were the two most important paths before dealing with the code violations. We made some recommendations about trying to get the yard cleaned up and the grass mowed, which they did, and that helped. Anytime you can show the city that you're making a good faith effort, they're willing to work with you, right? In my experience, the folks at the city, they don't want to further burden you and your home. If you show that you're trying and you show that you're trying to make an effort, especially if you're saying, hey, look, I mowed the grass or I tried to get the junk up and I'm selling the house, here's the purchase agreement. In my experience, they are more than willing to work with you on pausing penalties, stopping penalties, or, again, just kind of saying, hey, we know there's an issue, but keep working. We're not going to start the penalties yet, start the $100 a day fine yet. So again, it's one of those situations where if you bury your head in the sand and you ignore it, then it's only going to get worse. But if you show that you're trying to resolve and work towards either selling the home or at least getting the issues corrected, in my experience, the city is great to work with. And so again, but we knew that it doesn't matter, how many code violations or, all of the issues. If we could not get inside the home because the tenant wouldn't let us in, we couldn't fully address every code violation. So like I said at the beginning of this video, doesn't matter if you got one, doesn't matter if you got 100, the civil penalties would continue. So we knew that sort of in order of importance, eviction, probate, and then the code violations. So that's how we approached it. We immediately engaged with our eviction attorney and had them file the notice to vacate. In situations like this, in the past, we have typically liked to have a conversation with the tenant just to see, hey, are you willing to work with us, right? We've got some money here. We could either give it to you and you leave the property. Many times this is called a cash for keys agreement. Otherwise, this money is going to our eviction attorney, right? Somebody's getting this money. It's up to you to decide who's going to get it. In this instance, we felt like that wasn't advisable. Based on what the seller had shared with us about the tenant, we did not feel like that was going to be a good use of time or money, or even that this would yield the outcome we were looking for. So we proceeded down the path of evicting the tenant. Our eviction attorney worked quickly. Again, within a few days, we had the notice to vacate filed at the property. This is the first step in filing an eviction. The attorney then scheduled a hearing at the courthouse. We had that hearing, and the tenant showed up. The eviction was granted in the seller's favor. So again, in my experience, a lot of times the tenant doesn't even show up. They just go ahead and self-evict. They don't want to deal with it. They move on with their lives. It was not the case here. This tenant showed up and was seemingly ready to fight. Not physically, but legally. And so despite the eviction being granted for our seller, and the legal term is summary ejectment. So we were granted the summary ejectment. The tenant chose to appeal. And so because they chose to appeal, this got elevated up a level to the district court. And we had to have a bench trial where the judge heard the seller's side, heard the tenant side, and ultimately made a decision. And so this was a little painful for our seller to have to hear. They were expecting that this would be, an easy process, and here we are having another hiccup. And while that's not the normal outcome in these cases, that's what happened here. And so before we talk about the appeal, one thing I also want to mention about the eviction is, if you're watching this and you're considering taking on evicting a tenant yourself, it's very doable. Anyone can do the paperwork to file an eviction. In my experience and the feedback that our eviction attorney has given us, don't ask for the back rent, right? It doesn't matter if you got, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 in rent that you haven't collected. Don't ask for it. Simply ask for possession of the property. From what we've been told, the courts, especially Mecklenburg County, are way less likely to grant the eviction for, back rent unless you have a very, very, very open and shut case, right? You practically have to have the tenant text you, right, or email you saying, I'm not paying rent anymore, evict me. So it's not that an eviction will not be granted eventually, but a tenant can come in and say, hey, I'm struggling, I'm trying to make ends meet, I think I can get caught back up on the rent money. The court's going to hear that and say, okay, hey, you got 30 more days, you've got to figure it out, right? And so you're just delaying, as the person trying to evict the tenant, you're just delaying the inevitable, right? If you know they're that far behind or you know that they're not going to pay, what's going to change in 30 more days? So again, by simply asking for possession of the property, you avoid that entire situation, right? If the seller has not paid rent, that's a term of their lease, right? And so you're not asking for them to pay you money, you're just asking for possession of the property because they did not uphold their part of the lease. So again, it makes it a much simpler process, and that's the path we went down here. And so again, we were granted the summary ejectment. The seller just chose to appeal. So while that was going on, we were working on probate as well. And again, our seller had provided everything that we needed to our probate attorney, and we were working through this process at the same time. Again, we wanted this to be as efficient as possible. There's no reason to wait around for the eviction to get fully approved and complete before we started probate. They're separate legal processes, separate attorneys. Let's handle them at the same time. So we were working through probate, and this is when we discovered that, not only had, again, from what our seller had shared with us, hey, this attorney messed up some of the probate filings, we really saw to the extent the issues that had happened. So some big things, especially some big red flags with respect to probate. Notice to creditors had not been filed. The process for deeding the home to our seller, loose at best, to put it that way. A good practice, at least from my experience in North Carolina, is that all heirs, really anyone that could have an ownership claim to the property, it's a good practice to have them sign the deed. So as an example, mom and dad have passed away and there's 5 siblings and they're all married and there was no will, right? All 5 of those siblings would inherit mom and dad's home. Well, the spouse has a claim to that as well since there's a marriage. And so the attorney would likely want to see, as this property is sold through probate, 10 signatures on the deed. Again, 1 from each sibling and 1 from each spouse. In this case, there was not that many siblings. There were 3 siblings. There was a will, and the will explicitly removed 1 sibling. So there was just 2 siblings, and only one of them had been involved. And then unfortunately at this point in time, the father of our seller had passed away. So he was no longer able to participate and be involved. But his sister had not been involved when the original probate attorney was trying to handle this case. So our probate attorney caught that, was able to get everything squared away, and in this case, now we simply needed the one sister to sign for the grandfather of our seller. So again, it would be the seller's aunt. She was able to handle everything with the grandfather's estate, which passed the property to our seller's father. So at that point in time, now our seller was able to serve as the executor of his father's estate and sign documents and handle that piece. So again, not only did we have probate in general to handle, but we had two separate estates, one for the grandfather and one for the father. And so this got all untangled while the eviction was happening. And so as we come back to the eviction and handling the appeal, we showed up on the day of court, the eviction attorney, myself, and because the seller hired, or we hired this attorney for the seller didn't have to come. The tenant did show up for the appeal, and our attorney did a fantastic job calling witnesses and really just laying the entire situation out very simply and clearly. I'll save you all the legalese and legal mumbo jumbo. The courts were on our side. They saw where the tenant had not paid rent for a long period of time. In this case, there was an oral lease. Fortunately, when our seller laid out the terms of that oral lease, he had recorded that conversation. So, word to the wise, if you have a tenant and you are under an oral lease with that tenant, call them, record that conversation, and recap the terms of that agreement. Get them to agree verbally to that agreement. It could be very important in a situation like this, where we had to submit that recording to the court. They created a legal transcript of that, and that formed the basis for, again, our seller's complaint against his cousin, the tenant. So again, the judge ruled in our favor, and within a few days, we had a locksmith. Shout out Eastway Lock and Key here in Charlotte. They're fantastic to work with. That is who we choose to work with anytime we have locksmith needs, whether it's an eviction, changing locks on a property we bought. Eastway Lock and Key. Really enjoy working with those guys. So they were out along with the sheriff the morning of the eviction, and we got all the locks changed out with no issue from the tenant. He had gone on and moved on out after losing the appeal. So once we had access to the property and again, probate was moving in the right direction, we felt very confident about getting to closing. At this point, we had been working on this for about 2 months, from the time the seller had reached out to us to just getting possession and access of the property. So once we were able to get access to the property and walk around inside, we were really surprised. The inside was in rough shape. It was not in the shape that we expected. In this situation, with the tenant really fighting the legal battle and really trying to stay in the property, our fear was that when it became clear to the tenant that they were not going to have access to the property, that they were going to punch holes in the wall and rip wiring out and rip plumbing out and pour concrete down drains and in toilets. We really were expecting worst case scenario. And fortunately, that was not the case here. This was one of those situations where we needed some good luck, and I'd say that we got it with the condition that the tenant chose to leave the house in. So again, we're very appreciative that they chose not to go down that path of destroying the property, and we were able to move forward. So the last piece that was unresolved were the code violations. At this point, I think that they had accrued, I think it was close to $20,000, $18,000 in civil penalties. I mean, it was about 6 months worth of civil penalties. Again, about $100 a day, over 180 days, that's $18,000. So somewhere in that ballpark. And we were able to help the seller avoid these civil penalties, and we bought the property knowing that it had these code violations in place. So again, from the start, we knew there was an eviction and a probate issue. We became aware of the code violations over time, and we were able to get all of this taken care of in fairly short order, given the complex issues, right? I mean, a professional law firm, they do this for a living. I'm not going to name them. I'm not an attorney, right? We have attorneys that we work very closely with, but there's no attorney that's full-time, fully employed by John Buys Your House. We've got a great team. None of us are attorneys. So when I say our eviction attorney, our probate attorney, that is just the people that we choose to work with on a regular basis. They have their own firms. So the law firm that our seller originally hired, again, this is a law firm that exists in Charlotte. You could go hire them, right? They should know when to send these types of things to, another company or, another law firm. And they completely missed it twice, with an eviction and with probate. So again, we did something in about 2.5 months that law firm wasn't able to do in 6 months. And we're not a law firm. Again, we just knew who to talk to and where to go. So if you're dealing with these really complex, tricky issues within real estate, right? This is not a bread and butter type, hey, I listed my house on the MLS, my realtor is taking offers, some family wants to buy the house, everything's in great shape. It's not that type of closing. Right? There was a lot of moving pieces here. There was a lot of days where we were unsure, hey, is this going to work? But these are the things that we like to solve and like to help with. So we kept working one day at a time, pushing forward. We were able to get this taken care of for the seller in about 2.5 months. And so, like I said at the beginning, you wouldn't go to a heart doctor if you got an issue with your legs, right? Be very mindful of who you're seeking, legal advice from. And I understand that I've sat here and shared things that may sound like legal advice. This is just my experience. Again, I'm not an attorney. You should seek an attorney's advice if you're dealing with any of these issues. If you're dealing with these issues and you want help, reach out to John Buys Your House. We'd be more than happy to put you in touch with our eviction attorney, our probate attorney, our real estate attorneys. Again, they are the experts. They're the ones that ultimately, helped us help this seller get to a place where they were able to sell their house to John Buys Your House. So I'm really happy with the way everything turned out for this seller. They were able to go on with their life. At this time, they were trying to start a business, and this would have been just a terrible distraction. So they didn't have to think about anything. Once a week, I would call the seller and I'd say, hey, here's where things stand with the eviction. Here's where things stand with probate. The attorney needs this document, can you send that over to us? And that would be it. So it wasn't a long, drawn-out process for this seller to have conversations with the attorneys, drive across town, things like that. We handled everything. And then to close on the property while the code violations were still in place and avoid that expense to the seller was huge peace of mind for them. Again, for anyone that started a business or runs a business, in the early days, how important cash and capital is. So for them to pay an additional $18,000 to the city in this, early stage of their business, could have been life or death of the business. So they were very happy with the process and how we were able to get things squared away. So again, if you're looking for help with a complex issue involving real estate in Charlotte or North Carolina, give John Buys Your House a call. 704-610-4024. We're more than happy to help, learn about your situation, and see what kind of win-win outcome we can put together. We're very experienced in this, and we're always looking for new and exciting solutions to offer to families and people trying to sell a home. So reach out to John Buys Your House. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much.